can be used to push against Russia. It sits right next door to Russia, and because there's a history of animosity between half of what was Ukraine and with Russia, they're able to really push on some real background animosity there that a lot of Americans just don't understand. It goes back generations, and the press's job in all of this hasn't been to report on it, it's been to cover it up. And anybody who actually looks at the facts of the Ukraine coup in 2013 and 2014 can see how the U.S. was directly involved.
Thank you, thank you.
But it wasn't just an end in itself. It was a means to an end. And the end that they were going for is a way to antagonize Russia.
We'll give Russia no chance to invade Ukraine. That's why we are doing everything possible to provide extra financing for the armed forces.
And then when Russia responds in any way, then they can say, well, see, they're the aggressors. And they've done this over and over again. They've stirred up aggression against Russia right at Russia's border and then blamed Russia for anything that happened.
This is an act of aggression by Russia, that these were Ukrainian vessels traveling peacefully, seeking to go through the Kerch Straits to a Ukrainian port.
On November 25th, 2018, the first armed incident between Ukraine and Russia took place in the Kerch Strait. A conflict that could have easily escalated into major hostilities. Ukrainian warships attempted to enter the Sea of Azov, violating the state maritime border, according to the Russian version. The Ukrainian side claims that its ships were in neutral waters. During the conflict, Russian border guards acted aggressively and used weapons. The ships of Ukraine were detained and the crews were arrested.
I haven't seen you since the Kerch Strait. Any comments on that?
Бывший президент, господин Порошенко, устроил эту провокацию специально в ходе предвыборной кампании. Знал, что его на востоке, на юге страны не поддержат избиратели. Использовал эту провокацию, чтобы для нагнетания обстановки, а потом введения там особого положения. У меня есть основания полагать, что он хотел вообще ввести особое положение по всей стране. А может быть, отложить выборы в этой связи. Хотелось во что бы ни стало удержать власть. И искал любые средства для того, чтобы эту идею реализовать. Элемент агонии правящего режима.
Even though Viktor Medvedchuk was in tough opposition to the administration of President Poroshenko, he went to Moscow to negotiate with Prime Minister Medvedev on the release of Ukrainian sailors. It wasn't the first time Medvedchuk engaged in the fate of Ukrainian prisoners. Practically, he fixes the passivity and inactivity of the Ukrainian official authorities by addressing humanitarian concerns.
How often do you go down there to Donbass?
You know, I used to travel very often, have been to Donetsk and Lugansk. I had direct negotiations on the liberation of our citizens there, as well as in Moscow. So I have been engaged in negotiations, exchanges since December 2014.
The Donetsk People's Republic government said that moving forward there can be no communication with Kiev other than prisoner swaps that might be in the pipeline. Only Russia could act as a mediator.
Я хочу обратиться к вам с просьбой, используя ваш авторитет, проявить гуманизм, обратиться к главам непризнанных республик, господам Захарченко и Плотницкого, провести этот обмен, как первый этап обмена всех на всех.
I feel sorry for Ukraine because I don't quite understand all the forces that brought this division, this polarization of the country. From the American point of view, it's simply a button, a leverage point to use to excite the Russians and go after the Russians. So I would be very worried if I was anybody in the world, a citizen, that the United States is going to use this Ukraine thing at any moment to push towards a hot war.
The whole world is watching you. That's a fact. They're watching you because their hopes for your success.
You think that was a plan of the Wall Street people, of the Western people, where they wanted to make Ukraine a dumping ground?
You know, I don't even have to speculate about. I'm sure of it.
At the time of the collapse of the Soviet Union, many experts reasonably included Ukraine in the top 10 of the most developed countries in the world. Starting positions of the independent Ukraine were impressive. 1/3 of the whole USSR industry, the largest Black Sea shipping company in the world, rocket, aviation, and space industry. As a result, after reckless economic reforms, after breakdown of economic relations with Russia and other post-Soviet countries, Ukraine had a failure. Since independence, its economy has shrunk by 1/3, ahead of the poorest countries in Europe. After 2014, Ukraine took a sharp turn towards decommunization. Memories of the Soviet time fade one by one. But, together with the monuments, Ukraine is parting with its industrial grandeur.
Okay, what happens? So Wall Street people make money on this? Does Ukraine become a junk bond? Do they trade the future of Ukraine on stock market?
Ukraine, as part of the Soviet Union, was the largest republic in the production of locomotives and diesel locomotives. Deindustrialization in Ukraine led to the fact that we now purchase these diesel locomotives from the United States of America. Who benefits, Mr. Stoun? This is beneficial to those who today are lobbying illegal methods, affecting economic integration, the sale of their products.
5 years after the Revolution of Dignity, suddenly it became clear to everyone the West is not going to open its sales markets to Ukraine. Nobody needed to have unexpected competitors. It was much more profitable to force the Ukrainians to eliminate their potential. Ukraine used to be one of the few countries that could produce aircraft carriers. Now there is no shipbuilding in Ukraine. Ukraine used to create space rockets. Now it has no space industry, no aircraft industry. Ukraine doesn't have its own automotive industry.
The military-industrial complex once brought up to $3 billion annually to the budget. Today, most of the enterprises are closed. Some of the enterprises are located in territory not controlled by Kiev. Naturally, to say that today we are trying to export these products, these amounts are insignificant, which, of course, cannot come close to what it was before. Because the less we produce, the more we will purchase. That this is one of the elements of this external expansion and external management that Washington has introduced in relation to Ukraine since 2014.
It looks fantastic.
Another amazing experiment over common sense was the coal scam. Ukraine, which has rich coal deposits in the Donbass, has suddenly turned from an exporter into an importer of coal. It seems that in Kiev and Washington, they agreed to give a new meaning to the saying, to carry coal to Newcastle. After the start of the conflict in the Donbass, Kiev definitely refused to buy Donetsk coal and decided to replace it with imported coal from the USA and South Africa. It was possible to buy it in Russia, but the politics took over.
The second example, Pennsylvanian coal is much more expensive than Russian coal, and it is more expensive than coal from South Africa. And can you imagine the difference in transportation logistics? Ukraine and Russia, Ukraine and the United States of America, and Ukraine and South Africa. At the same time, today we buy 63% of coal imports from Russia. And we already buy 30% of all imported coal from the United States of America. Is this not the result of what you ask about? Is it not the result of who benefits? Who does it? Those who benefit from the sale of their products in Ukraine. In order to avoid domestic production, so that the country from the manufacturer turned into the country of the acquirer and the buyer. That's what the benefit is.
Is there any oil, gas? There's nothing here.
You know, we have oil and gas everywhere, but we do not produce it. It needs to be developed. Therefore, Ukraine is rich in resources. But resources require investments that must be made in the economy of Ukraine in order to extract these minerals. But the situation with the investment and investment climate in the country is extremely bad. The economy is not developing. The investment climate has not been created. There is pressure from the administrative resource. Raider seizure of business. The lack of a fair judicial system. So who would invest?
However, there were brave people who decided to invest in Ukrainian oil. The attention of world media is attracted by one company, Burisma Holdings. There are very, very interesting people on the board of directors of Burisma. For example, Hunter Biden is the son of the Vice President of the United States. Of course, this state of affairs is welcome, but one detail interferes. The son of the U.S. Vice President received his post almost immediately after the official visit of his father to Ukraine, in the light of obvious interest of Biden Sr. in everything that is happening in Ukraine.
Ex-Vice President Joe Biden, his son Hunter Biden has a deal in Ukraine. Explain that.
Yes, his son was and remains on the board of directors of one of the companies that is engaged in oil and gas production in Ukraine. So this also explains the economic interests of the Biden family. Not only the son, but probably his high-ranking father as well. Perhaps this was precisely what allowed Mr. Biden, when he was as curator, when he was in power, curator from the side of Washington in Ukraine. He actually behaved like a person representing not only the country that introduced external management, but it was a representative or leader of the metropolis in relation to the colony, where the colony was, unfortunately, my country. And his speech in the parliament, I remember it very well.
Thank you very much.
It was not just instructive. It was a speech in which he said what to do and how to do it. And when stating his position, he didn't base it on argument or explanation, but on the fact that this decision was made somewhere overseas.
The Office of the General Prosecutor desperately needs reform. The judiciary should be overhauled. The energy sector needs to be competitive, ruled by market principles, not sweetheart deals.
And you, the so-called legislature, before whom he speaks, should implement this policy.
Ukraine needs a budget that's consistent with your IMF commitments. Anything else will jeopardize Ukraine's hard-won progress and drive down the support for Ukraine from the international community, which is always tenuous.
On March 22, 2019, Ukrainian politicians from the opposition, Viktor Medvedchuk and Yuri Boyko, met in Moscow with Prime Minister Medvedev. It was about the conclusion of a new gas contract between Russia and Ukraine, as well as the transit of gas through its territory. Interestingly, on behalf of Ukraine, negotiations were not conducted by officials, but it could not have been otherwise. Until 2014, Ukraine was almost completely dependent on Russian supplies. However, due to disputes over the price of gas, as well as for political reasons, Ukraine does without direct gas supplies from the Russian Federation. In fact, as Ukrainian politicians themselves have already recognized, in the reverse mode. Through the special schemes, the same gas is purchased from Gazprom's supplies to the EU, but through European intermediaries, for example, through Poland. As a result, over 4 years, the price of gas for the population increased by 1,079%. That is the price citizens of Ukraine have to pay for fictitious gas independence. And then, a bilateral economic war began.
The thing is that Ukraine joined the EU sanctions against Russia, and Russia imposed counter-sanctions against Ukraine. And this dealt another crushing blow to the economic abilities of selling Ukraine's products to the markets of Russia and the CIS countries. Fortunately, has not found a replacement for these markets.
And 30% of the budget goes to pay the debt.
These are financial burdens that even a normal economy cannot withstand, let alone a state that is in deep crisis.
Щороку з України виїжджає приблизно 1 мільйон громадян.
I want to tell you that along with deindustrialization, we are still in a process that the authorities and our media do not notice. This is another process. It is called de-intellectualization. Why? This is due to the harmful negative educational system introduced in Ukraine. This is due to the lack of scientific and technical development today because science and the introduction of new technologies is not actually financed in the country. And naturally, the brain drain goes along the line of finding use for these brains. Deindustrialization led to the closure of tens of thousands of large and medium-sized enterprises. And after that, people were looking for work. And today, they are looking for it in Russia, in Poland, in Europe. They left because they couldn't financially support their families in Ukraine.
I set up the foundation in Ukraine in 1990, which was 2 years before the independence of Ukraine.
Where does George Soros figure in all this?
Unfortunately, everywhere. If we talked about some positive results from the activities of this gentleman, then we should have noted some success. But his activity is mainly focused on those countries where he took an active position with his various funds. We remember the countries in North Africa where the Arab Spring happened. Libya, Tunisia, and Egypt. We remember the Tulip Revolution in Kyrgyzstan. We remember the Rose Revolution in Georgia. We remember the Orange Revolution in 2004, and finally the consequences of not only the Orange Revolution, but also the Revolution of Dignity of 2013 and 2014. This is also his activity. He did not stop. He continued to operate in 2015 and 2016.